Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Croccast podcast. I'm your host Nate, along with my co-host Matt, and today we have the special honor. Today we have the special honor of interviewing Mr. Flavio Morrissiey. Is that how you pronounce your last name?
It's just Morrissey, yeah.
Morrissiey. Sorry, my bad. All right, so Flavio, can you first tell us how you first got into reptiles?
And I guess when I was a little kid, some of my earliest memories with my grandfather walking around catching frogs at street lights here in Florida. And, growing up, catching snakes and turtles around ponds, lizards, that sort of thing. And, it just kind of grew into, when you get a little bit older, you grow, what am I going to be when I grow up, And I think right out of high school, I started working at GatorLand professionally. And even before that, when I was in high school, I worked at a fish farm, and the head biologist at the fish farm, he was a herper, and he worked at St. Augustine Alligator Farm back in the 70s and 80s, and he taught me a little bit more, and I got my start, though, professionally at GatorLand. I worked there for about 18 years.
So were you into alligators already, or is that just something that kind of popped up as an opportunity and that's how you got into it?
Well, I'll tell you what. When I was a kid growing up in Florida, man, we didn't see alligators much. Back in the '70s, they were endangered at the time. They didn't really get taken off the endangered species list until the same year I started working with alligators professionally, and that was in '88. So once they got taken down listed, you started seeing them. But I mean, we swam in creeks and ponds, and man, you rarely saw an alligator. So I didn't have the opportunities to work with them, and there wasn't that many places, or people didn't have that many alligators at home or what have you back then, or hobbyists, of sorts, because they were restricted for permitting. And then that was how I got started, was at GatorLand. But I was into venomous snakes. I mean, I was die-hard venom constantly. And then I realized that we really don't know much about crocs and alligators, so I decided to go down that route and leave the venomous snakes behind. But I have some friends that still, they pursued careers in that, and so I get my venomous snake urges occasionally, and we do some field work. But and I started just working with alligators and crocs, and I gained a lot of knowledge from all sorts of mentors around this country and outside the country as I got older, and learned quite a bit. But I really took an interest in behavior management. So if you're managing 5,000 or 6,000 animals, of all sizes and different species, sometimes you have to be creative in how you manage them with people, because as you guys know, if you work with crocs, you have a chance of getting hurt or bit. Nowadays we have all the insurance liability, especially when you start moving up the chain and the ladder, that's where, you're forced. You have to have policies and have things. So we created a behavior management program at GatorLand, and we eliminated all accidents. We just got along with the crocs so well. We learned how to communicate with them, ask them to do things, get out of the way when we need them to, and, everything. I mean, we can collect eggs from an alligator right in front of her. She can watch us and participate and everything like that. Even with some of the crocodiles, saltwater crocs, Cuban crocs, Niles, a little bit of everything. So we did some amazing things that you normally wouldn't see a crocodile do in a captive situation.
That's really cool. So was what you did with them like socializing them, or was it like just understanding them better, or what? How would you describe like how you were able to get them like that?
Back then it wasn't a common practice to train reptiles. Just like you would take your dogs out. If you ever go hunting and you hunted with dogs, the dogs usually learn from other dogs. They come out, but you train them. Bird dogs do the same thing. But I started hanging out. We had a new CEO come into GatorLand at the time, and he was a killer whale trainer. And he's from Texas. He worked at San Antonio SeaWorld, and I think he worked at San Diego, but he did killer whales. So I had kind of an influence from that. And by learned, man, just how to basically train them. So communicate, not really socialize them, but just like you would any other animal, if you're training a dog to, go outside, to go to the bathroom, or to sit, stay, turn around, do whatever you need to do, you're basically using positive reinforcement. We would use negative reinforcement and other means. A lot of people that just get started training animals, like if you train your snake at home or your lizard and things of that nature, it starts with, you just got a pair of forceps and you got a little pinky hanging off or some piece of food, and you dangle it right in front of them and they grab it. Well, if you dangle it right in front of them, they usually will meet you. They'll come to you, and when they do that, the last thing that they did is what they're getting rewarded for. So if they're jumping, you're basically teaching each time. But you can also apply a cue with that. You can say jump right before he does it or she does it, and when that animal jumps and gets rewarded, next time you do it, you don't even need the forceps or the food. You can just ask them to jump, and they will jump. And then you can give them a reward, just like an attaboy almost, or a pat on the back, just like you would a dog. Good boy, pat them, and that works just as fine. So that's kind of how it works with the crocodile. Same exact way, same method. It depends on how you can move very quickly with crocs. They're really smart. They're almost as fast as training dogs.
Wow.
Sometimes you have a dumb dog, and sometimes you have a smart dog that you can't keep up with. Well, it's the same way with crocodiles. Trust me, those Cuban crocodiles were like that. You had to stay 5-10 steps ahead, or if not, they would meet you, and you weren't ready for it. And they would really scare the shit out of you a lot of times. And saltwater crocodiles are pretty smart too. And one of the smartest ones I've worked with have been American crocodiles, the ones we have here in the United States and Central Mexico and all throughout the Caribbean. Those are pretty smart, and that's what I just got done doing this weekend. I went to Belize. There's a study site I've been working with for about 3 years, and 3 years ago there was about 30 animals in about an acre of water, or a little over an acre of water, and they were going to have problems with human-crocodile conflict there. And the government wanted to they heard that we can possibly train them. These are wild crocs. Train them to stay away from people. So that was our primary goal, train them to see people, stay away from them, and also avoid capture. I know you guys have tried to catch something in your life, whether it's a crocodile or anything else. When it gets away from you, it can do it again. It gets better and better at it. So that's basically what we're doing, is teaching the crocs to get away, not actually catch them and make them submit. And that helps with them to avoid capture. Remember earlier we were talking about feeding the animal and you telling the animal to jump. Well, what we do is we create associations with the almost captures, we call them. And that is not positive reinforcement we're using. We're actually using positive punishment. So we're applying that punishment to them by trying to catch them. And then we associate that whole catching, or that negativity in their lives, with the people that actually feed them. So we get people just like them. We also bring equipment. The equipment are just fishing poles. So you just bring a fishing pole with you, because that's how you catch them. And then afterwards, within 2 to 3 days, all you have to do is walk up to the water's edge and show them a fishing pole, and they scatter and they start to go away. And then when the people try to feed them or interact with them, they don't even come near them at all, because we just have someone stop in once or twice a day. If you do that every day, not getting reinforced for being there anymore with food. So they tend to diffuse. And so it's worked, and I go and check it out at least once or twice a year. So after 3 years, it's worked, just for a 3-day tryout. It worked out pretty cool.
Wow, that's incredible.
Yeah,
that's
so
really cool.
We can apply this in the wild now. So, all the animals like the nuisance trappers, get alligators, crocodiles, stuff like that. We can actually train these animals to stay away from people. It's not going to work in every single case, but it's another way to prevent them from being destroyed, I guess you could say.
Do you find when you're when you train like these gators at like GatorLand, do you find that they'll only respond to you, or do they do that with everyone? Because like when I worked at the Kentucky Reptile Zoo,
yeah,
they had to go into the gator pen to get something, and they were trying to tell it. It kept coming near them. They were telling him no, but it wouldn't really listen until Jim came out, and Jim has trained it its whole life and stuff, and he said no. It, like, whenever he told it to do anything, it listened to Jim, but didn't really seem to listen to anyone else.
Well, that's like anything. If someone has more of a better relationship, if you have a bunch of animals and there's one person has a better relationship with those animals than anyone else, that's going to happen no matter what. So whenever we did the program for GatorLand, you got to understand it's a corporation. So I didn't build the training program for Flavio. I built it for GatorLand. So when I walk away at any time, let's say I leave tomorrow, or when I did leave, then I left that training program there. It should be able to work for anybody. So that was some of the things that we did. We implemented that anybody can train. My role was directing it and applying the training outside, and I would have people do it, because not everybody is a good trainer. Some people just don't know how to do it. It's timing. That's like having someone tell a joke. They can't tell jokes. They shouldn't be telling jokes. Well, they shouldn't be a trainer either, because timing is everything when you're doing training. As I said earlier, when you feed an animal and you give it that positive reinforcement, if you miss, then you didn't give it that positive reinforcement. It could backfire on you. You can lose your training that you've applied already. So same thing at your place where you worked. Those animals worked with that person so much. They're so familiar and associated with them. Probably some respect or positive actions in their lives, that they'll do anything for him. And I've seen that with crocs and gators. These animals will do anything for him. And I also have been to other facilities where they absolutely hate the owner or the person that works with them, So, and I'm sure if you guys have been around the block, you've seen that too, where, they may have beat the hell out of the animal, or something like that. And then, those animals don't want to go near them or do anything for them.
Yeah.
So is that a lot of what you do now, is working with like behavioral stuff with crocodiles and stuff like that?
Yeah, so I do that for consulting. I do consulting at zoos, where I work with either behavior issues. I was in zoo management, so I can do finance. I can do anything, especially in small, like family-owned operations around the country. I've worked in, almost 100 different facilities in the U.S. and outside of the U.S., just helping them along with acquiring animals. I know know licensing very well, and the laws federally, states, all the states in the U.S. as well. It's what I kind of do. And if someone needs help with permitting, I help them with permitting. That's a big one, especially for young people that want to get involved and have their own animals. When they're like, man, I can't get a permit. And a lot of times, if you don't know the law and know how to work it, then it's going to be very difficult for you to get it. So a lot of times people hire me to say, hey, I need this permit. And I go, okay, when do you want it? How do you want it? And I'll have to ask a lot of questions to get you there. Like, let's say you wanted to run, you wanted to import some crocodiles from Asia or something. It's a lengthy process. It may take you a year to do that, because especially with COVID right now, it's a pain in the butt to do licensing, especially with the federal government. State governments aren't so bad. So those are some of the sorts of things that I do. I also do raise money for conservation. I don't know if you guys ever heard of CrocFest or not.
Yeah, I have.
I think you guys are out in Texas, right? What part of Texas you guys from?
I'm actually from Ohio, but I've done several internships in Texas.
Ohio, you went to work over in Texas. Okay, cool.
I've done a few
So you're
internships,
getting ready to do a CrocFest in Texas, yeah.
Yeah, I'm planning on going there this year.
Place, Crocodile.
Yeah, I actually interned there 2 years ago.
That's a really good place. Nice. And so yeah, that's a cool place. And then they're going to postpone it because of COVID, which is fine. I believe we're still going to do a CrocFest this winter. We usually do one here in Florida in the summer and one in the winter. And we haven't nailed down our winter facility yet. But we just had our record-breaking CrocFest. We made over $100,000. So since we've been doing CrocFest, we've raised almost $1 million for crocodile conservation for all kinds of species. This past one was for the Indian gharial. I don't know if you guys ever been to India or know anybody from India or any of those conditions over there. It's pretty poor. And you have this monster croc. I mean, that's like one of the biggest reptiles in the world. I mean, Salty just competes them, or is bigger, because they got a big head. But those gharial are really neat, and behaviorally speaking, they're awesome, man. They do shit that you can't fathom for parenting, especially for parenting. They're really cool, very successful, but pollution is the main culprit over there. I mean, they're just, they throw their dead bodies in the water. They bathe in the water. They mine the sand, and those crocs need sand to lay their eggs. So they're hole diggers, not nest builders like alligators are.
Yeah, I was actually going to go to that Croc Fest
cool.
I live in Florida. I live in Fort Myers, but I actually completely forgot about it, so I missed it. But
okay. I'm going to be at Fort Myers all this week, Matt. I'm going to a conference down there, so if you ever want to meet up.
Yeah, for sure, definitely. We'll have to meet up.
All right, cool. But yeah, I grew up in Orlando, Florida, so I'm a Central Florida person. I've never spent much time on the West Coast of Florida, but right now, since COVID, I have taken on the director over at the Sarasota Jungle Gardens right now, and I've been doing that for about a year, and we're making some changes there. We just got a new crocodile the other day, a female croc, American crocodile for our male that we have there. So we're hoping to do some breeding here soon with that too.
So you mentioned you do some conservation work with American crocodiles. Can you go into more detail about that?
Yeah, so a few of the countries that I've worked with, those have been Belize and also Jamaica. Jamaica is an interesting country. It's really it's a challenge to work there. The culture there is not like other cultures that you visited, and the American crocodile's having a hard time there right now. There's a lot of conservation issues too with habitat loss. A lot of the coastal areas, and and a lot of it has to do with politics with China and the Jamaican government. So there's always some sort of corruption involved. Now they're finding people starting to eat the crocodiles, which they've never eaten the crocodile before in Jamaica. So that's going to make it a little bit more difficult. But I participate with helping out with head starting, and we've also raised money through CrocFest over there as well. I went to Jamaica earlier this year, and we were applying the same methods I was talking about earlier, using training methods to prevent the crocodiles from attacking people. There was a section, an area just outside of Kingston that had crocodiles, and people started feeding dogs to the crocodiles there. It was it was it was a problem. They were posting it on the internet and things like that. So it started accelerating, and then next thing you know, it's like their entertainment during COVID was to feed the dogs out, and that's just a matter of time before someone says, "Well, let me throw a person down in here and do this." But anyway, we started working there and doing the crocs and doing the same method and teaching the government officials there, and they're kind of animal, like U.S. Fish and Wildlife equivalent. It's called NEPA. And those guys are really fun. I stay in contact with them on a regular basis, and I think that they're getting ready to do some survey work and survey the whole country and start tracking some of the animals to see how they're moving around and that as well. So there are some efforts there, but it's been a challenge. The other place I work quite a bit and go a couple of times a year is Belize, and Belize is a cool country because they're really progressive. They want to help out and help, try not to kill the animals. Another country that we're going to this fall is the Dominican Republic, and work there. I would like to go to Haiti too. Haiti's a really, bad off as well. So when you go to some of these countries where, they don't have a lot of resources, it's pretty tough to apply some your typical conservation methods because they just don't have the money and they're hungry, man. You can't expect them to I don't want to eat to save a crocodile, So it's a challenge. And I have been to Cuba too, but Cuba's closed right now. We were going to go to Cuba and do some work, the same method using the training. So I'm excited to keep doing this and teach other people how to do it. And then that way it's an alternative other than, capturing the animal and destroying it, especially for some of these cool crocodiles out there. Even alligators. I may have a chance to work with alligators in the same method in the wild here in Florida, which is kind of cool.
That's really cool. I really like how it's a tactic that poorer countries can do to help
Yeah,
the crocodiles and stuff. That's
yeah. It doesn't cost anything, man. It's like a fishing pole and a hook. I mean, I usually when I go, I try to get people to donate, fishing poles and good. I mean, not a cheap ass reel that can handle a 300-400 to 500 pound croc, and then that way I can leave it there for them and teach them how to use it. And believe it or not, a lot of these Caribbean countries and that they don't use fishing poles; they use hand lines.
huh.
So they have no clue all the time how to use a fishing pole. So they just have different methods of fishing. They're like, man, I've never used a fishing pole before. But once they use it, get the hang of it, then they're excited about using it.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So that's what I've been up to these days, and it's always fun. I've transported crocs all over the place and teach people how to catch, teach people how to train them. But found that there's a lot of different things you can do with crocs out there.
So, outside of crocodilians,
Guys
is
like
there any other sort of zoological or herpetological work that you do?
I had a buddy that he went FSU, got his PhD at FSU. He used to do a lot of venom work, and I've helped him over the years when I get a chance. You just know colleagues that are out in the field and do different things. And I used to do eastern diamondback work with him all throughout like the southeast. And I've always loved eastern diamondbacks, one of my favorite snakes. And I'm a cottonmouth hound too. I can watch cottonmouths all day. There's a place I go if I just want to get away from it all, and I can just sit all day and just follow cottonmouths around. There's a pretty dense population I go to and just watch them. And man, I've seen them feed on deer carcasses and fight turtles for carrion. I've seen them just gobble up snakes and stuff just right next to them for no reason. All kind. They're just fun to watch. But I've done some turtle work too. Some alligator snapping stuff, turtle stuff, and then I have our last beneficiary, Jeff Lang, Dr. Jeff Lang. He's doing some Blandings turtle work up north, and I've always wanted to work with those. So he invited me next year when he goes out at his study site to go do that. But I mean, if you guys ever had a chance to do field work, sometimes it's pretty rough and sometimes it's cushy. It depends on where you're doing it. But I've been in some rough situations where that the nature is not nice to you. It's hot or just cold, freezing cold. Just depends on where you're at. But it's all interesting and fun and very challenging. And you're always discovering something new as well. And I've been on expeditions where we found new species of herps before. That's a lot of fun. Um, Especially down in South America and that. And I really like the Americas. So I explored mostly the Americas, and that's something that I've always wanted to do since I was a kid, was to explore and find things. But I didn't get started until I was 31. I really didn't leave anywhere, go anywhere until then. So for the past 20 years, I've just been going as much as I can anywhere.
So when you do venom work and stuff, is it like venom research specifically, or is it more like into the behavior of the venomous reptile?
I always wanted to do some of the behavioral stuff with venomous reptiles. Like I have a behavioral plan to teach venomous snakes to deliver venom on their own on a cue rather than grab them and extract the venom.
Wow.
That way you can eliminate all the safety issues. It would take me a couple of weeks to try to do that. I just have never had time to do it, and I wrote the training plan probably like 20 years ago. And it's just one of those things where I would love to work on at a venom lab for a couple of weeks and do something like that. But most of the stuff I've helped out with was evolution, more of evolutionary biology, taking venom in the wild. So we collect the animals, remove the venom, and then they would study the venom and also rodents as well. So they were doing parallel studies with the evolution of the rodents in that same area that they would feed on and see what kind of resistance they had to the venoms in those areas. So they kind of did a nationwide study on the venom types out there. So it's pretty interesting. We've all know about like cane breaks and stuff like that here in North Florida and eastern diamondbacks with that type A venom. well, there's other areas too that have it. So it was pretty interesting to see some of the work that they were doing. But I was more of a tag along, and we would just go out and hunt, eastern diamondbacks, collect them, bring them back, do all the morphometrics on them, and then take some venom, and freeze it and bring it back to the lab. And they would just continuously do work with that, but it was all on evolutionary biology.
Did they find at all? Do you know if did they find rodents at all becoming resistant a little bit to them? Wow.
And it was really neat when we did that. When I was a kid, I remember I was telling you guys earlier when I was first getting into business or whatever, I was into venomous snakes, and I remember meeting Bruce Means. He was up at FSU, and he was an interesting guy. He did all the stuff with eastern diamondbacks, and then there's another guy named Walt Timmerman. He did some stuff with eastern diamondbacks, and these are all the guys back in the 80s, 70s, and 80s that did all that sort of thing, and some of the 90s, and then other people just picked it up from there. But when I first met those guys, they were doing all kinds of work, and I would talk to them a little bit here and there. But and then you would meet some interesting folks out there that really knew a lot about eastern diamondbacks that you'd never hear about. They never publish anything or write, but they're just good herpers in general, and they can just take you out and show you all kinds of cool stuff. So hanging out with all of those types of people, you get to learn a lot just on how to, do the science, collect data, and do the whole 9 yards. So that's kind of, in a nutshell, where it comes from.
Do you you may not know anything about this because it seems like you're more into like the East Coast snakes, but I read this article about Mojave rattlesnakes and how there's a population in Arizona. I guess there's like a large population that has one type of venom, and then like a small population within that has a completely, or not a completely different, but like just a different type of venom. Do you know anything about that? Like why that is? There seems to be like
it's the same way as it is here in Florida. It's almost the same thing. It's usually geology. So if you go to North Florida, and if you're from Fort Myers, you know that Florida was not always this big. It was exposed, and there was a river that went all the way up into the Appalachians. The Apalachicola River kind of is part of that or whatever, but it would come all down. That's why Venice is filled with all those fossils down there. And you got all those fossils. That was kind of like the delta, drop-off points. So there's just all these bodies that were just dropped right there. Well, that right there was a division line. You have the Appalachian Mountains, and then you have the Atlantic Coastal Plain, and also the Mississippi River Valley. So you have that big convergence in that area. That's why the venom is much different there. So the geology has a lot to do with some of these things. And go back what you were asking for earlier. When we go to some islands, for instance, we went to Georgia. We went to one island up there, and the animals were giant. They were all like, a 5.5 foot animal would weigh like 8-9 pounds, just massive, right? And then we would go to another island on the panhandle of Florida, and those animals were like, we knew that they'd been collected before and they had the data on them. They were like 20-year-old animals, but their max length was, like 28 inches. And they were flat out adults, but didn't have the weight on them or anything like that. And it's because of those islands really didn't have a lot of nutrition on them. They're sandy, scrub islands. And so those rodents there didn't have a lot of nutritional value either. But not saying that that's why they're stunted in growth, but it's just those animals just don't have the need to get larger, and that's what happened. We found, I think they found like 12 or 14 in one gopher hole. And the island didn't have a lot of support for many vertebrates. Most of the time, a coyote would come over. That was like the biggest vertebrate that would come over. I don't even think white-tailed deer came over there too often. But they would swim over and then they would leave. So it just really depends. So that's the same thing out in Arizona. It's that geology. So sometimes you'll have a mountain range or some sort of obstruction where maybe there's the higher nutritional value through that period has grown. So that's typically like a basic answer, I guess you can find out. But I remember reading about that when I was younger too, about the Mojave, especially in Arizona. Those guys over there were like something you did not want to get bit by.
Yeah.
And then it's the same thing here in Florida. If you go to North Florida, between that, that Okefenokee Swamp and Gainesville, that's even worse than those ones out there, out in Arizona, the Mojaves, and especially with the Eastern Diamondback and the Canebrakes.
So you mentioned you do some like crocodile transporting. So do zoos contact you purposely for that, or is that just something you kind of just fell into?
Sometimes it depends because right now to transport crocodiles, especially here in Florida, you need to be a licensed individual or a permit individual. It's not in all states, but you do. And if you're like in another state and you're going to bring it into Florida, a lot of times if there's going to be a transaction from an outstate or an outsider to insider or insider to outsider, sometimes they need help with that transport. So that's where it usually comes into. And I have transported a lot of animals in the past. From just about every state. I've been out to California transporting animals up to the Northeast, Minnesota, Ohio, Pennsylvania, West Virginia, you name it, all over the place. So just it's how you transport them too. Makes a lot of difference. Depends on the time of year. You've got really a lot of heat. The size of the animal makes a big difference. I remember the last thing I ever did at GatorLand, my wife and I, we were not married at the time. She was my fiance. We were up in New York City. I got a call from this teacher. And this teacher had, when he first started, I think he started as a 24-year-old teacher, and he started a zoo in the basement of the school in Long Island, New York. So anyway, when he started the zoo, someone heard about it. They found this alligator over in Manhattan. I guess someone had an alligator and they turned it loose, and they actually found it in the sewer, right? And it was just a little guy. Yeah. So it was just a little guy at the time, and they gave it to him, and he was in this basement in the zoo. Anyway, the animal's about 2.5 feet long originally, and this guy was retiring, and no teacher wanted to take it over, so now this animal's 11 feet long. And so he grew up in this basement, and we went in there. It was cold, man. It was like 40 degrees in the basement because we were like January 1st or something like that. It must have been like 15 degrees outside. And the only way to get out of there was to climb up these steps, like a basement steps on the outside, and they were covered in ice. So, it's like, well, how do you bring this? And it's just me and my wife or whatever, and we put it in, it was in a tub, like a cattle tank or whatever, is the water, and it couldn't even really submerge. The animal didn't look, deformed or anything like that from not having sunlight or anything like that, but it was fairly decent. Kind of, didn't have a lot of color to it. It was, bleached out a little bit, just like a lot of alligators have in darkness. Anyway, I sent my fiance in, which wife now, her name's Bab. I said, why don't you jump the alligator? So I made her get in that. That water was cold too. So she had to get in the water and get the animal secure. So we taped him up, and then we picked him up. He wasn't really bulky. It was kind of nice him not having a big animal. Yeah, he was probably maybe like 220 pounds. We did have some helpers, and we had to kind of climb up those damn stairs, and it was like they were just covered in ice. There's just no friction at all, so it was pretty bad. But we finally got him up. But we transported him all the way to Florida, to GatorLand, and we bring him down here. We put him in a pool, and the pool was filled up. He didn't know how to swim. It was the funniest thing. This animal freaked out because he couldn't swim, so I had to drain the water down real quick and kind of acclimate him to being in deep water because he's never been in deep water since he was a little guy. So it was kind of funny doing that. So that was like one of those transport stories. Have you guys ever been to what was it? Not Black Hills out there. You guys know Terry out in South Dakota?
No, I don't.
Reptile Gardens. Reptile Gardens. Been out there?
I've heard of it. I've never been though.
Yeah, so that place is pretty cool too. We had to transport some alligators there and then transport them back as well. And that was interesting. That was interesting to say the least. But I mean, those animals up there, I mean, they barely get to be outside that long because it gets so cold. I mean, it starts getting cold like in about 2 more weeks. It's going to be almost too cold. They start bringing the animals indoors. So there's different places that have challenges. And then another thing that I've noticed in a lot of zoos is people don't know how to catch crocodiles anymore because it hasn't been passed down. So that's a frequent thing why we transport them a lot too, is because a lot of times they don't know how to catch them. And that's funny. I mean, you probably think that's funny, but it's like, man, you don't know how to catch a croc. It's probably because of people getting sued and lawyers and workers' comp and all these rules and things of that nature. And we just transported this female American crocodile a couple of weeks ago from West Palm to Sarasota, and when we did that, I mean, we didn't have to catch her. We had to help her because she was kind of big around the midsection, but we had trained her to go into just crate. So we just get in there, shut the doors, pick her up, and go. But she couldn't fit in that crate too well, so we had to she climbed in. We just kind of had to push her in a little bit afterwards, but that was the most that we ever had to do with it. And then we just brought her in and opened the doors up and climbed out when we got back to the zoo. So she hasn't been touched other than when we were putting her in. So you can train your animals to get in and out of crates. We train them to do just about anything. I can pull blood from them. You can put a camera, endoscope down in their gullet while they're sitting there for you. Removed abscesses, did minor surgery, stuff like that. Just to try it to help out vets, because a lot of times people don't know how to work with crocs. I mean, it wasn't really published that ivermectin is deadly to a crocodile, and alligators. They die. I mean, it didn't take much at all. So, but vets used to try to worm the alligators and crocodiles when they come in and would kill them, but they didn't publish it much.
Interesting. Why is that, do you think?
I don't know why it's poisonous. It's poisonous to some tortoises, also like indigo snakes, king snakes. So there's a lot of reptiles that are have reactions to ivermectin. Panicure is good, but ivermectin just didn't do too well. So I mean, even big facilities that have all the resources, they didn't know either. It's interesting. I've seen one facility lose a bunch of Nile crocodiles one time. And that was probably about 15 to 17 years ago.
Wow. So, I'm actually like you. I'm really into the behavioral aspect of reptiles, and so personally, my favorite is like tegus and monitors. I really like watching them just do their thing. So, between like snakes and crocodiles or gators, what crocodilians, what would be your favorite to just watch, to observe, behave?
I watch anoles all the time. These brown anoles. Matter of fact, I did a news piece the other day, and there's a local weatherman that just moved to Sarasota, and he's unfamiliar with Florida, right? And he goes, "Can you tell me about these little lizards that are running around?" And so, and we did a whole news piece on them, but it was kind of neat because you kind of take them for granted because they're just running all over the place. But for 101, basic behavior 101 for herps, I mean, you got these big males that are, communicating. They're doing their push-ups, their do-laps, head bobs, whole 9 yards. And if you go over to I don't know how many iguanas are down there where you're at there, Matt, but iguanas are fun to watch too. I was just in Belize over on the coast, and I was watching all these tenosaurs down there, just having a blast with each other, and saw some good fights and things of that nature. But even the varanids, those are really cool. I've worked when I first started doing training and that, I went around to a lot of different zoos, and I recorded a lot of people working with varanids. And one of the ones that really struck me the most and quick learning were the Mertens monitors, which is a small varanid, probably less than 2 feet long and it's aquatic.
Yeah.
Really smart lizard. And they have these cool abilities, so you can train them underwater, on top of the water, and all kinds of things. So they're pretty decent. And the Parentes are really smart too. I don't know if you had a chance to work with those.
Unfortunately, no.
And tegus tegus in general are amazing. I've seen some tegus that were just the family, rag doll. Everybody just plays with them and everything else, and it seems like they kind of cuddle up with just about anybody. They don't have a problem with certain ones. And my first experience with tegus, we had some wild caught tegus. This is back in the 80s that were confiscated and brought to GatorLand. So these were brought in from South America. And these were the nastiest things alive, and they never tamed down, man. They were just, they'd come in and grab hold of your pant leg and just shake it like a rag. And they're funny. And they weren't big and bulky like those black and white tegus. They're kind of sleek. They weren't very long, maybe like 3 feet long, but really, really slim animals. And man, they were so fast. They ran like our race runners here in Florida. Just as that Nemodopher has gone all over the place. So, so those are my experience. But I can watch tegus all day long too. Any of those teids are awesome. They do all kinds of neat stuff. I mean, watching them forage, and I don't know if you ever watched them before, but they listen. They put their ear up to things. So, like, if you ever see a woodpecker do that, they go bap, 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 and then they put their ear up to it. The tegus do the same thing. They're like looking around, they're tasting, and then all of a sudden they stop and they put their ear up and listen. So they're always tasting and listening. They're just really interesting, especially for a terrestrial animal. I've seen them get in and like leaf litter, just find a snake. I've seen them catch snakes and things before. They're pretty neat.
Yeah, that's what I love about tegus is literally you could just watch them all day, and they're like a dog almost. Like you just like they like being pet underneath the chin. They actually seek some of that. It's pretty cool. And like you're saying, like the feeding behavior. So I have a tegu, and I initially didn't plan on target training it for like feeding or anything because I was handling it as much as I was feeding it. But then there was a couple of weeks that went by when after I first got it that I wasn't able to like actually handle it. I only got to feed it, and and as soon as it was like you were saying before, as soon as I actually went to go feed it, and I had a friend. I was like, "Hey, want to watch?" And as soon as I went to go put my hand in there, it was going for my hand. It kept like, jumping up real high, going for my hand and everything. And it wasn't even going for the food, just for my hand. And so then I had to target train it, and they're smart. So it only took like a week or two before I had this little orange thing. I just put it up next to the glass, and it's really cool because I can walk up next to it, and he's perfectly fine. He just sits there, he's chill. I can pick him up, I can do whatever, and then like I can walk away and then come back with that orange thing. As soon as I put that up there, it's so cool to watch him just switch into that different mode, and like. Or just like looking for where's the food and stuff, and I put the food in there. He doesn't try and bite my hand or anything, but I put the food in the hair, and just their feeding response is so cool to watch.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen them go after like little beetles, grubs, and big things, and and watch them pin things, and I've seen people make mistakes and get bit by those things as well. So you see a lot what they're capable of doing. I've seen them drop their tails before.
Really?
Pretty cool, yeah. There was two of them fighting, and the other one just barely grabbed that tail, and it dropped at the base. And the animal that lost its tail was a dominant animal in the area, so it was interesting to see. And that animal even became more ferocious without that tail. It was
wow.
It was amazing what it could do then. It just seemed like the tail limited it a little bit. But, watching some of that behavior is kind of interesting. Courtship behavior with them, all of that. And if you could see it in a wild setting, it's even more interesting. If you think about what the day in the life of a lizard, it's not peachy keen all the time. They have to contend with predators, competitors, and then they have to find, some other animal to breed with, that urge that they have, and then they'll go do it at all costs, So sometimes some of these things are interesting to watch. So lizards definitely are some of the interesting ones to watch. In the spring, if you ever have time, I mean, you're down on the coast there. Coach whips are pretty cool to watch. Some of these snakes that are just hyperactive, like coach whips, especially. I would say indigo snakes too. If you can sit there and watch indigos, Those things just can't sit still. They don't understand that. They're always just moving. I was over in Texas one time. We watched this indigo. That thing was about 7 feet long, and it just destroyed all these frogs. These Rio Grande leopard frogs, man. Must have ate 35 of them around. It was all dry, and we were just looking around. We were looking at the frogs, and we were catching a few of them. And all of a sudden, this indigo just comes over the bank and just comes around the edge and just grabs one, keeps swimming, and along the edge, he's got a frog in his mouth. He's looking for the next one, and he just swallows down real quick, grabs another one, I've seen some other cool stuff. One time I saw a little skincilla, little skink, the ground skink, and it was on top of some leaf litter. And man, I was just watching. I climbed out of the water. I was up at Rainbow River in mid Florida there. And when I got out of the water, just sitting there resting, and I watched this ground skink, and there was an explosion from underneath of it. It was a ringneck snake. Grabs this thing by mid-body.
Wow.
And it was like this giant struggle. So when you get to see like herps in action, it's pretty cool. And I also, in captivity, I've seen a ringneck snake that was being swallowed by a coral snake, and it grabbed the coral snake by the bottom lip and held on, did not let go.
Wow.
Held on and venomated that snake and got out of it.
That's insane. That's so cool.
It took it almost. I remember I fed the snake to the coral snake, and I watched it, and it just held on. I said, "Well, I'm just going to leave it," and came back later on, a couple hours later, and that coral snake was limp around the head area, and then that ringneck was able to get out.
That's crazy. That's like I did research with Eastern Kentucky University for a summer where we did a behavioral study of copperheads, and we're following this one copperhead around, and it's just it's this field, and it's all the way on the other side of the field, and we're watching it, and it's kind of putting its head up like it's sensing something, it's smelling something, and then it starts on the move. So we're following it, and it goes up to the base of this tree. And it kind of like looks up the tree. So we look up the tree, and there's another copperhead up on a branch on the tree, and there's a cicada at the end of the branch. So it goes up and it starts to eat the cicada, and then somehow the cicada is able to like wiggle its way out of its mouth, gets out of the mouth, starts crawling down the body of the copperhead. So the copperhead's like trying to turn its body and trying to get it, and while it does that, it actually knocks the cicada off, and it falls to the ground, and the copperhead that we were following that was on the ground just walks over and eats it.
Wow.
It's one of the coolest things I've ever seen.
I know, and you could tell someone, but unless they were there,
right?
You're like, man, how does that happen? It's like falls right into their lap, and you see some weird stuff. Like I was telling you guys earlier, I used to watch cottonmouths, and this area where I watch the cottonmouths, it's I don't know, it's kind of like some weird soap opera, man. You just watch them, and they're like always looking for something to eat, and there's always something happening. Like I remember one time I was watching an otter started coming by, and this otter's got a mud snake. It's chomping on a mud snake. It's dead. The mud snake's dead, just chomping on it. But he's just sitting there, just chawing. He kind of takes a rest, and man, one of the cottonmouths smells it, and the cottonmouth's like 5 feet away or whatever, and just goes over there and starts grabbing the mud snake. At the same time, this otter. So I forgot about that. It was like a little tug of war with an otter for a few seconds, and then the otter just took off and swam off. But that's what cottonmouths do. They don't care. They just go over. Hey, what's going on? Let me have this. And if they lose, they lose. They just kind of sit right there until something else comes around.
I heard that cottonmouths will flag areas, like they'll bend like brush or something like that that are areas for collecting food and stuff. Have you seen that?
I haven't seen that, but I mean, as we start to make more observations and we have video cameras in our hands at all times and things of that nature, we're going to start seeing stuff that the animals do that we could share, because we could share this stuff. When I was a kid growing up, I mean, the stuff you see now, you're like, you couldn't even fathom it. I mean, it was it was still, people did not believe that alligators helped the young out of the nest when I was young. I remember arguing with the older guy, and this guy was in the business. So I was just like, what? You got to be kidding me. And it was published way before that, but if you didn't read like one of the 10 books that were out there ever published before like 1990, then you weren't going to learn much.
Wow.
So that's the thing too. The resources today are simply amazing. I watched several videos from colleagues that were actually doing their work in the field. Before, you had to wait 2 years to see something like that in a slide presentation, Kodachrome slide presentation. Now you can see it in the field right now. So we can get information so much faster. And so when I meet young people, I'm like, you guys have way more information than I had at your age. Because I'm 50 now. I'm not that old, but, after 30 years, I remember, you're thirsty for books. And you want to read as much as you can and meet people. And then every once in a while you get a paper or two you can read. But other than that, you would, swap libraries. If someone else had a library, you can ask if you can read their stuff. So it just depends. But, man, it's amazing what you can watch now. And behavior is all over. I remember when YouTube first came on, I would catch some videos and try to post them up there about some of the training that we did. I mean, I'm kind of an introvert. I don't go out and post a bunch of stuff on my social media and that, but I do like to film a lot, and I like to watch and use it for documentation whenever I have to do a presentation or write a paper or problem solve. I still do zoo management when I can, so I'll apply those methods as well. So always observing things.
Yeah, the world. I always like to say the world's a lot weirder than we think.
Yeah, I mean, and most of the stuff is pretty logical. When I first learned about behavior, my first lesson was, that someone told me, they said stimulus response, and that's pretty it. That's pretty much it. You react to something happening, and that's the beginning of it. No matter what you are, and that's with evolution, the whole 9 yards, with how animals are designed, how they eat, how they behave, breed, mate, whatever. And the other part of that lesson was their needs. There's primal needs that all living things need, and that's food of some sort, nourishment, or water, shelter, and they have to reproduce. So they need sex or love or whatever those things are. Those are primary needs. So when you look at that, those are the motives of all living things, whether it's plants, animals, or the other kingdoms, funguses and other single-celled organisms that we haven't even met yet or heard of yet.
Yeah, that's what I find so fascinating is their behavior, just seeing their behavior, and then as it relates to like the evolution of it, and just like finding out like why do they look like this, why do they behave like this, and what's going on, what's the stimulus that's causing this response and stuff. I find that stuff super fascinating.
Yeah, and then the only way to really do it, like back in the day when you go herping, you're out to catch things. When I go herping now, I like to go watch things and just follow them around. And sometimes you just have to be extremely patient. I do a lot of wildlife watching, whether it's birds. I watch herps, insects, a little bit of everything. When I usually go into the jungles, I love to watch insects. There's always something happening. If you take a crap out in the jungle, it lasts for maybe a half hour and it's gone. The bugs come out of the woodwork. You'll have dung beetles come in, everything else. So it's just everything just goes away pretty quick. So there's a job for everything out there, and it's amazing how fast things go away. Or you can set down a green leaf, pull it off a bush, and set it down on the ground, and it's gone. It's gone in no time flat. It starts to decompose really quick, or something gets it, starts tearing it apart, eating it, and using it for something. So there's no waste, especially when you go to a jungle.
That's so cool.
Yeah. Yeah, so, enjoy it. But when I come down to Fort Myers, I'll look you up or whatever, and then, we can go do something or whatever. I haven't been to Fort Myers in years, or Sanibel. And I remember when I first started working with crocs and alligators, I know that there was a resident male and female down there in Sanibel, and I went to go see them. So I got to see American crocodiles there, and now American crocs are, they're starting to move all over the place, so they're really successful in Florida right now because we haven't had any cold weather in a long time.
I didn't know there was actually American Crocs in Sanibel. I'll have to check that out now.
I think, and I heard a report that there is one. It's not a resident at this time, but it comes and goes quite a bit.
Okay.
But there used to be a big male. There's a book called Jaws 2 by a guy from Fort Myers area, and he wrote it's all about Sanibel and alligators and crocodiles.
Sanibel's awesome. It's a gorgeous place.
Yeah. So.
I go there all the time for fishing and stuff.
Yeah, that's cool. It looks like it would be I've only been there once or twice. I just never make it down that way too. But I've always been on the East Coast, and it's they're night and day. They're totally interesting.
Oh yeah, for sure. There's a spot up in Cape Coral that's just a massive. I guess it's supposed to be a preserve. I don't really know, but it's just massive. It's just empty. It's just empty land, and I just go out there for hours and just walk around. And I find that's mostly where I go herping around here. But I find all sorts of there's gopher tortoises everywhere there, and there's just I find something new like every single time I go there. It's pretty cool.
That sounds pretty cool. Me and a buddy of mine, Troy, are going to go down to Boca Grande. Are all the tenosaurs still down there?
I don't know. I actually haven't made my way up to Boca Grande, honestly.
They say that there's a bunch of tenosaurs all over Boca Grande.
I'll have to check that out.
Yeah, I think there's a guy on YouTube. All he does is shoot them. He's been hired to kill all those lizards, and then the neighborhoods don't want him there doing it. So it's like this big controversy.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. Because everybody loves them. They don't want them out of there, but FWC is just not interested in having
First Florida
from you. They're going to put all the resources in like that. Yeah.
Yeah, first Florida community I've heard of that wants to keep their iguanas around.
Yeah. Well, the West Coast is not the same as the East Coast. The East Coast are all from like New York and the East, and I think most of the West Coast people are all from like Midwest area, Chicago, places like that. They're a little bit more open to stuff like that. So.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, in Fort Myers, I've only seen 2 iguanas, like in Canal and Fort Myers. I did find a population in Cape Coral where I found like a bunch of them. But that's the only spot in Cape Coral. Otherwise, I'd have to go down to Naples. That's the only spot I really see them on the West Coast for the most part.
I've seen them up in Siesta Key. There's a small population in Siesta Key on the north side of the island, and I'm really surprised there's not more than that. I mean, once they drop some eggs, man, you got yourself another 50 iguanas. So I mean, they reproduce pretty quickly.
I think because Naples is more of like it's not a city as Fort Myers is, so I think you just have to it's harder to get to the areas where you would find them in Fort Myers, I think.
Yeah.
But I think there's a population in that spot in Cape Coral that I go herping at. I think because I've seen one iguana there in like passing, but I don't know. Like I've never seen any other there. But if there's one, there's got to be more. So. But yeah, so I think they're just in spots where a lot of people don't go.
Yeah, South Florida is an interesting place. I don't get to go down there too often. I've never. We used to go down and collect venom in the Everglades and all the way down to Flamingo from pygmy rattlesnakes. And there's just so many pygmies down there. Those are interesting animals too. I've done some work with those and have watched those in the wild. Up here in Central Florida is some of the densest populations of pygmy rattlesnakes, like 60 per acre in some areas. And and you usually have to go in the wintertime and you have to wait for heavy rains. What happens is the St. Johns River, kind of the banks, if the water rises and forces all these snakes into smaller areas, and it just like concentrates them, and they're everywhere. You just walk through like these palm trees, and you're walking through the water, man. They're all just on the boots and everywhere, and you can just stop and just like do a 360, look around, and see within, just in that eye shot, maybe 10 of them.
Wow.
I remember one time we went, I took a friend, I was telling him about it, he didn't believe me, and we go out there, and you had to wade in the water to get across, up to your chest, and then you would get out to that area. And so we took all of our, stuff out of our pockets, our wallets and stuff, and just kind of stashed them in the bushes. And on the way back, we had seen probably like 30 pygmies in just a small time, maybe about 30 minutes or so. And we got back, on my top of my wallet was a pygmy rattlesnake coiled up on top of that stash in the bushes. So I thought that was funny.
He's trying. That's funny.
Yeah. So yeah, they're pretty cool. Well, hey guys, I have to run. I have to get up early. I'm gonna go surfing with a buddy of mine up in New Smyrna Beach. But Matt, I'll definitely try to get a hold of you. I'm gonna be there on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday.
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, that looks like a good spot to stop. I'll get your. I think I actually don't have your number. I think Nate has it though, so I'll get it from Nate.
I have your email. I don't have anything else. Sorry.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I'll text you my my information too if you want to pass that to Matt.
Will do. Yeah, I'll definitely make sure to.
Okay. Sounds good.
I'll definitely make sure to contact you when I try and start up my reptile park and try to get croc permits and everything. So.
All right, cool. Yeah, if you guys ever have any questions or anybody has questions out there, feel free to hit me up. I'll be glad to try to help out and answer anything. If you ask around, I always try to help people out, and sometimes it's not always orthodox. So, but because if you want something done, sometimes you have to be really creative.
Yeah.
And but there's a lot of ways to do things, and it's just you just have to read the fine print and the laws and the regulations, and you can get done whatever you want to get done.
Cool. Sounds great.
All right. Well, it was great talking with you guys. Nice meeting you both, and hopefully I'll see you this week, Matt.
Yeah, for sure.
Right. Thank you for joining the show.
See you guys later.
Yeah.